What are we talking about? Well, today it's all about energy. And energy for me is the key to a successful and a happy life. Now, the first thing you see here is a gun. It's a rifle. It's a high velocity rifle. It's a short one, which means it's called a carbine, and it's normally used by people who travel around in armored vehicles, tank commanders, tank crewmen, and those that crew other armored vehicles on the battlefield. It fires a bullet, and it fires a bullet that travels at 740 meters per second or so. And that bullet traveling at 740 meters per second, therefore, in 1 and a bit seconds will be a kilometer from here, from the moment that you pull the trigger. We'll probably get back to why that slide is there in due course. But for now, this is me. I'm an executive and performance coach. And I used to be a smoking, drinking, partying young officer for most of the 80s. I was then lucky enough to meet my wife, and yes, 30 years ago now, we celebrated that this year. I gave up smoking and drinking, and the result from giving up smoking and drinking, or meeting my wife, was that I became a different man. And so I got into high performance wherever I could find it, including in my military career, and started to proceed regularly up the slippery slope. I actually resigned my commission back in 2010. So I've been a civilian for the last 11 years. My goodness. Yes, sorry, I was just thinking about how long I've been retired. Good. So what of it? Well, energy comes from 4 sources: your body, your mind, and that's often around purpose, why you are here. It comes from emotions, and again, that's about purpose too. And it comes from spirit. And I love this picture. And this picture actually depicts a chap on the right called Sam Instone, who just happens to be the CEO, joint CEO, and owner of AES International, in whose offices I'm currently sitting. Now, that's 2 weeks ago that picture was taken, and he's at Everest Base Camp looking up over his right shoulder. He's the guy in the dark shirt. Up over his right shoulder and above the guy in red's hat, you'll see Everest itself. And that's the best picture I could think of that reflects spirit. But I'm going to tell you a story now. And this is a story about combat and warfare and life in challenging circumstances. And what I'm going to show you could be pictures that could upset some of you. So if you are of a nervous disposition or don't like violence, then probably not the story to listen to. And if you log back in 15 minutes, we'll continue this talk without any graphic representations. So this is a warrior armored vehicle. It's an APC, an armored personnel carrier, which means it's a battle taxi. It carries people around the battlefield from A to B, hopefully without them getting shot or blown up. It's armored, which means that anybody attacking it has to get through the armor on the outside. And it carries 6 to 8 people in the back, and it has a crew of 3. And here you can see the commander sitting up a little bit too tall for my liking, and probably for his if it was a combat situation, and his gunner sitting next to him. And then down below is the driver. So those 3 stay with the vehicle, even when the guys in the back get out to go and fight on foot across an objective, or to clear buildings, or just to put a presence on the ground. Now, it's a very impressive vehicle. It's well armored. It has a set of applique armor on each flank that you can see behind the chicken wire. And then it has the chicken wire. And that chicken wire is there for a purpose. The chicken wire is basically there to stop the RPG-7 warhead from exploding. Now, you've all seen an RPG-7. It's a shoulder-launched missile that has a trigger mechanism here. And on the end is a lump. And it's a sort of pointy bullet-shaped lump, which is the warhead. And that's what flies into, in this case, an armored vehicle such as an APC. But if you have this chicken wire on the outside, the front of that warhead has a fuse. And it's only when that fuse is struck or strikes something that the warhead explodes and sends a shaped charge, and it's very cleverly designed, to basically send a molten slug of metal at 8,000 to 10,000 meters per second, which is 12 times the speed of a high velocity rifle bullet, into the side of the vehicle. Now, you can imagine that if we can stop that little fuse from igniting the explosive behind it, then that molten slug of metal never takes place and we don't get any penetration of the armor, which is in several layers, and therefore no penetration of the vehicle itself, and therefore the people in the back are nice and safe. And you can see from this chicken wire on the outside of this vehicle that that's the idea. And sometimes these vehicles will come back into camp looking like porcupines because they would have so many RPG-7 warheads lodged in the armor that had not exploded. We would then remove them and send them back out to the fight. So it's an interesting vehicle, and this is what happens when you don't have that chicken wire on the outside. You can see several points on this vehicle where the armor has had to do its job and hopefully has stopped the molten metal from getting right through and into the inside of the vehicle, which is, as you can probably appreciate, catastrophic. So that's a vehicle that has been got. Now, there's nothing you can do in the sort of warfare that we've been conducting since the early 2000s. There's nothing you can do about kids with Molotov cocktails. I mean, nothing, because you can't shoot them either. And so this is what happens when a petrol bomb, a bottle of petrol with a fuse, which is normally a bit of lighted rag, is launched into an APC. Out jumps the commander. Not sure what happened to the gunner at this stage. He didn't get out. The fire is out pretty quickly. And in this case, this commander ejected himself from about 8 feet up into the air onto a rather hard road, put himself out, got back into the vehicle and got on with the job. And the guys in the vehicle were all right as well, because we have fire extinguishers and things like that. But it's a pretty dirty place to be fighting a war, because you don't know who the enemy is. It could be a child, it could be a terrorist, it could be an insurgent, it could be somebody, anybody in the street. But back in 2006, we were in a very large battle, 200 insurgents, armed insurgents, and we had APCs on the ground and infantry on the ground. And this APC was commanded by a fantastic colour sergeant called Ian Page. I was the battle group commander, and he was from the Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment, which was attached to my regiment, the Queen's Royal Hussars, and we were the battle group. And he was a fantastic guy who was not averse to challenging my authority when he felt I was wrong. Very, very healthy attitude, actually, because if you don't get challenged as a leader, then you're irrelevant. So being challenged was always good, and he was willing to challenge me. And he was a very strong commander who had a very strong team. And in the back of that vehicle were his team. They trained together for a long time. Now, Colour Sergeant Page, Ian Page, sitting up there on the top right in his commander's seat, was in the midst of this battle. He was watching the battle. He was orchestrating his forces to do what was necessary to achieve our aim with 200 very, very active insurgents in and around him. And it's at this point that that bullet from the first slide comes into play. Colour Sergeant Page is up on top. He's holding his personal weapon, because to fire that big gun would be outside the rules of engagement in this particular situation. So he's using his personal weapon, a small arms rifle. As he's looking across the field, and he's wearing a set of headphones just like mine and talking just like I am, but instead he's orchestrating troops, that bullet arrives. And the bullet passed through his hand and then through the rifle and then through the lower part of his face. Now, this is a bit of a self-drawing, but it'll do, of what happens behind a high velocity bullet. You get cavitation, which means you get a hole, an area where there is nothing behind the bullet. The bullet has got a lot of pressure in front of it and nothing behind. So it makes a small hole in whatever it hits. And then there's an expansion behind the hole. And then what is left is sucked in behind that expansion and comes inside and is dragged through by the cavitation, by that void. And that's what happened to his hand and the rifle that he was firing. And that passed through the lower part of his face and basically hit him in the mouth, removing much of his upper jaw, all of his lower jaw, everything back, unfortunately, to his windpipe. Colour Page was mortally wounded. He was going to die, and he was going to die of one of two things. He was either going to die from the shock, which is what often kills people in gunshot wounds where a high velocity rifle is fired, or he was going to die because his airway was now blocked by what was left of the lower part of his face. So he was in a bad way, and he slumped forward in his cupola, in his turret, and was in desperate need of help. Now, at this point, the people in the back of the vehicle, his team, tried to get him down through the cupola, but he was jammed up above. So he was still out in the open, and the sniper who had fired at him was still active. The sniper was still firing and missing him. And then the medic who was in the back of the vehicle decided this would not do. The medic couldn't get to the wounded soldier. So opened the back of the vehicle, climbed out of the back of the vehicle, climbed up over the back of the vehicle. And if I take us back, you'll see it's an exposed area. So climbed up over the back of the vehicle and got to Colour Page. As that medic did so, the sniper fired 3 more rounds, at least. Those are the rounds that we count because we know where they hit. So 3 more of these rounds arrived, and the medic kept moving forward. 1 hit the radio that the medic was carrying. The next hit the belt, and the third hit the boot, taking the heel off it. The medic continued forward and got to Colour Page. And this is an artist's impression, but it's as accurate as we can accept because we don't do a lot of battlefield photography when this thing's going on. And the medic treated Colour Page, cleared his airway, and forced him back down into the vehicle, having cleared the bits that were holding him up and keeping him from the team pulling him down. They pulled him down, and then the gunner, seeing that the medic was still out, still being fired at, grabbed the medic and physically dragged the medic down through the gunner's side of the turret and into the back of the vehicle, where the medic continued to administer life-saving treatment to Colour Page. Now, all that was pretty remarkable. But what is more remarkable is that this is the medic. Michelle Norris, forever to be known as Chuck, was that medic. At the time, actually she was just 19 by the time she went to see the Queen and received the Military Cross. The first female to receive the Military Cross, the first medic to receive the Military Cross. It's one down from the Victoria Cross, and the Victoria Cross tends these days to be only given to those who are posthumously awarded it. It's very rare that you find VCs that are given to anybody who survives. So, Michelle Norris, a slip of a person, very small, and very much part of that team. And what a demonstration of pure, absolute energy. Now, what we're going to do now is think about how that happened what she had at that age with her experience that led to this act of supreme bravery. I know this story really, really well. I wrote the citation that put her in front of the Queen in April of 2007, and the Queen gave her her medal personally. We're back to energy. Where did she get the energy, the mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual energy to do what she did, which was extraordinary? Well, the first place she and you and I get our energy is from physicality. And that physicality, and this is vital to think about, comes from three places. And remember only these three. Sleep as the number one. And I put 60% of our energy, our fitness, our health down to good sleep. Margaret Thatcher, Ronnie Reagan, both so pleased with themselves for running their countries on 5 hours of sleep a night, 4 hours of sleep a night. But what happens while you sleep is that you've got a mental brain sewerage system that occupies the night hours and cleans the sticky proteins out of your brain. Those sticky proteins can build up otherwise. And when they build up, they start to block the neural pathways. And before you know it, you are starting to be forgetful. You're a little bit slower about your reactions. Your eyesight's going. And that's all about your neural pathways being blocked up, often by sticky proteins left over from thinking and being awake. Being awake is low-level brain damage. And then at night, we repair that damage and come back stronger, hopefully, the next day. But if you don't sleep well, you don't repair that damage, and the damage builds up. And Alzheimer's and early onset adult dementia of all other types as well starts in your 40s. So sleep is the most important piece of energy. And poor old Ronnie and Margaret both died without really knowing who they were or who their children were in their late 70s and early 80s. So in the case of Michelle Norris, she was a very fit person, and we'll get back to the other parts of physical energy right now. The second part of physical energy is eating right. It's the right nutrition. And that right nutrition needs to be the right time, the right things that you eat, and the right size of what you eat. And if you get any of those wrong, you are going to store fat rather than use it for energy. And you will get larger and less healthy. And in due course, you'll be fat, sick, and nearly dead. And then dead. So the second part of this, after 60% being sleep and getting a straight 8 hours, oh yes, there are some people that can do less than 8 hours. Yeah. Those people are very rare. There's a genetic mutation that allows some people to get away with less than 8 hours sleep. That genetic mutation occurs in 1 in 13,000 people, which means you're more likely to be struck by lightning. And I don't know quite how many are on this, but I'm pretty sure none of you have that genetic mutation on that basis. So sleep comes first. The second piece is that fuel, the nutrition. And nutrition has a purpose. It has a purpose to keep you healthy, but more importantly, to keep your gut microbiome healthy. In other words, all those bacteria that we carry around, and we are 90 trillion cells of bacteria and only 10 trillion human cells. So you're actually mostly alien. You're all just a vessel for carrying around that metropolis, that huge community of bacteria that keeps us healthy and gives us our immune system and beats COVID. And what you eat, it really matters that you're fueling those bacteria rather than you're fueling your own body, because if you fuel those bacteria, then you will have a strong immune system. When you eat really matters too. And I personally do a version of intermediate fasting where I don't eat before 11 o'clock in the morning or after 7 p.m. in the evening. And that allows my system to be fasted by the time I go to bed at 9 or 10. because you don't start fasting when you stop eating. You start fasting when your body has dealt with all of the nutrition that's in the system. And eating within 3 hours of sleep is bad for you and will reduce your energy. And eating within 1 hour of waking up is bad for you and will reduce your energy. So an 8-hour window seems to be pretty good for me. And remember, I am not offering you nutritional advice for all of you. Please go to a nutritionist for that. I'm just telling you for education and entertainment purposes what I do. Now, on top of that, you can talk about what you eat, and I try to reduce simple sugars wherever possible. I don't remove them all. And finally, about how much you eat. And that's a matter of actually just being conscious about what you put into your body, being conscious about the purpose of each plateful of food. Each plate has a purpose. It's either repairing, or it's preparing, or it's maintaining your current situation. And if you think of a plate of food as repairing from a heavy exercise session, or preparing you for a big meeting or a webinar, then you suddenly start to think about food in a different way. It's not automatic. It is not to solve your feeling of hunger. It's there with a purpose. The trouble is, of course, these days, food is so available that every time we're hungry, we go to the fridge. And we bully our poor gut microbiome into working the whole time, and they never recover. And therefore, you never really have a healthy gut. And you, if you do eat to hunger and eat lots every time you are hungry, will ingest more than you need and will store that as fat, normally in females around the bum and the legs, and normally in males around your middle and the spare tire. And it's that adipose fat, that extra fat that you're storing, your visceral fat that is around your organs and will, in due course, kill you. Now, the final piece of this, obviously, is exercise. But there's no real need to do very much exercise. I put 5% on exercise in terms of health. And rather than call it exercise, I'd rather you just moved, and moved often. So in order to be energetic, move as often as possible. Once an hour, I get up from my desk and I'll spend some time squatting, just 3 or 4 squats, or doing a press up, or stretching. And then I get back to my desk, like the rest of us, and get on with it. So that's it. That's your physicality. And if you are lucky enough, as most on this webinar are, to have access to modern medicine, which is improving on an exponential scale, then there's no reason why you shouldn't live for a very, very long time. And the only big downside to that is your financial planning. Funny, I'm sitting in an office of a fiduciary, and this is all about financial planning and wealth management here. Anyway, but the point is that if you live for a long time, you are going to have to prepare for it. And if you want to live for a long time, and when I say live for a long time, I mean live well for a long time, not in an old people's home looking out at a wet Maidstone car park while you're quietly sitting in an adult nappy and waiting for the nurse. No, I'm thinking about, I want to die young, as late as possible. So I want to be really, really moving when I'm 106, which happens to be when I believe that I will run out of my useful life. Now, the human body is by nature designed to have a planned obsolescence. And that's around 50 years. Because by the time you're 50, you've probably done your evolutionary duty and you've had children, and that's your job done from an evolutionary point of view, after which you can pop your clogs, die. But we all want to live longer than that and have healthy, useful lives where we can add to other people's success. Well, that's where we come from here. And on that basis, I want to live as long as possible. Now, the average car, whether it's this one from 1902 or the Tesla that you're going to buy next year, has a planned obsolescence too of about 10 years, 12 years. And the human body has a planned obsolescence of about 50 years. So I'm 8 years past my sell-by date. Well, If we look after ourselves and take advantage of that fabulous medical science that is being developed all the time, there's no reason why we should die off too soon. In fact, for people who have access to this sort of medical support and lead a healthy lifestyle, your life expectancy, which is really exciting for me, is approximately 88 for a female, 83 for a male. But that's growing by 3 months every year that you live. And that's accelerating. So in a couple of years' time, it'll be 4 months for every year you live. And by the year 2036, you'll be able to add 1 year to your life expectancy for every year that you live. And now you're all thinking, hang on a minute. Yes, you'll still have the same amount of time left next year as you had this year. Better start planning. So that's the physical side. Now we also have a mental side, and this is where you have to have goals. This is where you get your energy if you've got goals. Goals matter. So setting good goals, and I've set a couple. In 2023, I plan to be Ironman World Champion at 60. In 2050, I plan to be Ironman World Champion at 87. Hopefully all of my competitors will have died off by then, and I'll be in an age group of 1, which means I just have to finish the Ironman. But in 2050, I plan to be racing the Ironman. And then when I am world champion in 2050, I plan to defend that title for as many years after that as I possibly can. So I've taken my plans out 30 years, near enough, 29 years. But you should all have plans, because when you've got a plan, when you've got a goal, and the first principle of war is selection and maintenance of the aim. When you've got a goal, then you will have energy and you'll be going towards something instead of away from something. We all know that feeling, oh, I've got to get away from this situation. Well, if you're getting away from a situation, any direction will do, and it could take you anywhere. And that anywhere might not be where you want to go. But if you have a goal that you're going towards, your energy is amazingly expanded. So on the mind, I'm just going to say, know where you're going, why, your purpose, why you're going there, when you're going to achieve it. Make sure you've got some fixed points on those railway tracks to this bright, sunny upland of the future. And then tick off those mainline stations as you go past them, one by one, as you go towards this vision of what the future could be for you. And you'll find that your mental state improves rapidly. Now, we also have emotions, and this is all down to good relationships at work, good relationships at home. In the case of somebody like me, married for 30 years, saying sorry, even if it's not your fault, sometimes, occasionally, might not be my fault. I'll still say sorry and try and mend bridges, because we all know that good relationships need to be worked at. And if you've got good relationships, you will have emotional energy. You'll want to do things for other people, and they will want to do things for you. And the final part of this is spiritual. And when I'm putting up the word spirit, some people immediately think of, this is not Sam, by the way, but Sam was in the last one. Whenever I talk about spirit, people think about religion. And this is clearly not about religion. This is actually about doing the right thing in everything that you do. And I have this sort of mental image of walking into a room sometime in the distant future. And in that room, there's a box in the center of the room, and all the people I've ever loved, or who love me, or who have ever known, who want to know me, or I want to know, are in that room. And as I go into the room, people can't see me. And I realize why. Because in the box in the center of the room is my body, and I have died, and I'm 106, and people are talking about me. And as I go round that room, I want to hear what they're saying. And I want to hear David was a good bloke. David was a generous bloke. David was a nice guy. I don't want to hear David was a good bloke, but you should have seen the way he treated that dustman. Or David was a generous bloke, but he still owes me 100 quid. Or David was all right, but he had a terrible temper on him. Because we all know that in any English sentence, The words that precede the word but are negated by what comes after the but. In other words, David was generous, but he owed me 100 quid, means David wasn't generous. So I want to go around that room, and that's my version of spirit, looking forward and therefore acting now in a way where those people will have as few buts as possible. Nobody's perfect, but I'm hoping they'll have as few buts as possible. And I'll be going around that room at 106, hearing nothing but the positive first half of the sentence. And that, for me, is where we talk about spirit. Now back to Michelle Norris, MC, alias Chuck. Chuck Norris was as brave as could be. And when you are fearful, you sometimes stop thinking, you stop using the prefrontal cortex. And that is when you stop being human and start being a monkey. You start using your monkey brain, and all you can do is fight or flee or sometimes freeze. And Michelle Norris did not. She kept thinking. She got herself between the commander's cupola and the back of the cupola and the commander. She tried to get on with the job no matter what. And she knew she was being fired at. 3 rounds that she would have known about came very close to her, and she kept treating Colour Sergeant Ian Page, who, I'm glad to report, survived, was properly rebuilt, never very good looking in the first place, my view, but properly rebuilt and a great guy. And she has gone on in the army. She's still serving now, still known as Chuck Norris, not surprisingly. And she was fully in control of what was going on. Firstly, because of her fitness. She could climb up there with the heavy medic's pack, her own personal weapon, and get on with the job, even in the most adverse circumstances. She was fit. Secondly, she had a really good relationship with her team, including her commander, a proper, loving relationship with her team. And when she felt she was called to do her job, she drew on that relationship to give her more energy to do what she had to do. Now, she had been wanted to be a soldier from a very young age, I believe 7 years old. And she waited till she was 16 before she joined the army. And then she had to wait before she could deploy on operations until she was 18. And soon afterwards, this happened. But she'd always had the goal of being the best soldier she could be. And that goal was her mental strength and her mental energy. So what we've got here is a very fit person, somebody who had had the right relationships, someone who had the right goals, and somebody at the end of the day who knew the difference between right and wrong and her duty towards her team. And I believe that's why she is the first female and the youngest ever recipient of the Military Cross. And for me, she is, was, and always will be an inspiration about all parts of my life. Okay, so from there, I've got a couple of questions that have come in. Who else inspires me? Let's do questions. Who else inspires me? I haven't even thought about this, but actually, I'll tell you who else inspires me. Just about everybody who turns up to boot camp on a Tuesday and Thursday morning at 5:30 in the morning. I don't think I'd turn up if there was nobody else there, but I turn up. I turn up because I have inspiration in the people. There were 22 people on the beach this morning, so they inspire me. What advice would I give someone who struggles to maintain their rituals? Well, if you're struggling to maintain your rituals and you've given them 21 days, they're probably not the right rituals. Rituals should be something that are not too hard to achieve because you can see the benefits of them. Now, rituals are the scaffolding around our lives, the things we do every day that mean we're going to have a great day. I'm just going to see if I've got... Right, anybody wants to put any Q&A and you can put it into the question and answer button at the bottom. I got a question here. What has been your biggest challenge and how did you overcome it? Well, I know how I overcome all challenges. I'm not going to say what my biggest challenge is, because it was probably having children back in 1991, 30 years ago, and we overcame it through in vitro fertilization. But I don't think that's quite what you all meant. So I overcome all problems by using my strengths, by using the things that I know I'm good at, and I delegate all the things I don't think I'm good at. And I'm pretty brutal about delegation. So things that I do are the things that only I can do. And then anything else that comes in, I delegate upwards, across, and downwards, wherever possible, to people who are better equipped than I am to achieve those results. My rituals are always to get up early in the morning. Caroline gets pretty peed off about it, because we used to have one morning a week where I wouldn't get up, but I always wake up with a headache if I stayed in bed. So I'm up between 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning every morning. And one of the rituals I have is to see the sun come up. We're lucky, we're in Dubai. And in Dubai, you can almost guarantee to see the sun coming up. For about 4 days a year, it's clagged in with fog, but otherwise, one of my rituals is to get up early and see the sun come up. And the reason behind that is partly physiological, chemical, electrical, if you like. Because if you watch the sun coming up, then your melatonin will rise 14 to 16 hours later, and you'll sleep like a baby, and you'll sleep like a log every time. So if you're struggling with sleep, get up early. Get up early, watch the sun come up, and kickstart your circadian rhythm to put you to bed at the right time that night. Next big goal, Jim Kenny from Australia, a fantastic guy who I met about 4 years ago now. And he's one of those people that inspires me. Jim Kenny got in the ring at the age of 40x and did a white collar fight, white collar boxing. And anybody who gets into a ring, man on man, there's nowhere to hide. And Jim Kenny is an inspiration to me. He's asking, what's on the horizon? Well, I shall be training hard from about the 1st of December for an Ironman in South Africa. And that's a bit of a free swing, because I'll be 59 and therefore at the top of my age group, unlikely to go to the World Championships. But then in 2023, it's the World Championships of Ironman. And I've got a very clear goal of standing on the top of the podium, God willing, that year in Kona or wherever they're going to run it, and be world champion and arguably the fittest 60-year-old on the planet. So I've got to keep my energy going. Rob Marinelli coming in from Zurich. So we've had Australia and now Zurich. Rob Marinelli, what advice would you give for getting your gut back into a healthy place for someone who's gone off the rails with too much snacking? What a great question. Sorry, I read the whole question, Rob. Looks like you've gone off the rails with too much snacking. Anyway, Rob, the point on this is very much to bite the bullet and get back into your rituals as soon as possible. We all know that snacking is just an automatic response, and it tends to be more Pavlovian, in other words, habit, than it is chemical requirement. So some of you will be addicted. Lots of you are addicted out there, and mostly you're addicted to sugars. If sugar was invented today, it would be banned because it would be classified as a poison. But we cannot ban sugar, and nor can we ban the Western diet, nor can we ban the epidemic of obesity that has taken place in the West and is clogging the National Health Service and every other medical facility in the developed world. But we can make a difference ourselves. So I'll just give you this idea for fooling your brain, and that is hunger is the feeling your body gives you when you are burning fat. And that should be celebrated. So every time I'm hungry, I don't go to the fridge. I celebrate it. I say, great, I'm burning fat, I'm getting leaner. I'm not burning any muscle. I'm just taking off the excess that we don't need. So to get back into a healthy place, you've got to start. And today is about the best day you can have for starting anything. And we've all got excuses. We've all got reasons not to start. But excuses and reasons and lies, well, I treat them all the same. Excuses and reasons and lies are all just your way of giving yourself permission not to do something that you know you should do. So from my point of view, Start today. Stop snacking. Get the snacks out of the house. Willpower is like courage. You can run out of courage. You can run out of willpower. And every time you use some willpower, every time you go to the fridge and you see that half bottle of good red wine and you don't want to drink, you're going to have to use willpower to prevent you filling the glass. So if you get rid of the wine, if you get rid of the chocolates, if you get rid of the chocolate biscuits and start to enjoy real food instead of non-foods, then the chances are you'll very quickly get over your addiction to sugar. About 4 days. It's almost as hard as crack cocaine though, so sorry, it's not going to be easy. But thereafter, you'll be able to taste food better. You'll be a lot more energetic. You'll be sharper in the mind. You'll sleep better. You'll probably be a nicer person to live with, if you could be. I'm not sure that Rob Marinetti could be a nicer person. There isn't a nicer person on the planet. But at the end of the day, there's always a little bit of improvement somewhere. So that's my answer to you, Rob. Rachel, what can you do when your goals don't align with those of the people you value most and have the closest relationships with? Really good question. Okay, so there are social and cultural norms that will always derail you from having the healthiest possible life. And you are going to have to make compromises. I mean, frankly, if I had a choice, I would have you all being teetotal, because alcohol is mostly sugar and is poisonous, and it also keeps you up late, and therefore you're going to be sleep deprived. Many of you have hangovers based on the sleep deprivation and the lack of repair in your brain rather than the alcohol that you drank. But I know that culturally and socially, we all have pressures to partake of drink, and also particularly in the UK, it is frankly, the drinking culture is now much stronger than it was even when I was a young officer and misbehaving badly. So you have to make compromise. But if you put some goals around your health, then you'll find that those that love you will align their goals with yours rather than you aligning yours with theirs, because they will see the value of those goals to you, who they love, and also to themselves. Because then they can stop giving themselves excuses, reasons, lies about why they continue to drink or smoke or lie in bed or stay up late scrolling through, yes, I do it, scrolling through Instagram. So yes, your goals, your purpose and your values, if those align, then other people will align with you, Rachel. That's my glib answer, but it may take a lot of, I mean, there are people like me who are really good at coaching around this subject, but I'm busy, sorry. That sounds terrible, but I know what I mean. Are there any other questions? I've got one new one. How does being the best version of yourself relate to your wealth? And that's a great question, seeing as that I'm sitting in AES International at the moment. Quickly check my watch. I've got 10 minutes left. So the answer on that one is that if you get healthy, you will find you've got more energy to make the right decisions, not only around your lifestyle and your quality of life, but also around your finances. And where I said that there are coaches that can help align your goals with your values and your purpose, there are plenty of coaches, particularly in AES, who are duty bound. This is a fiduciary, which means that they are duty bound to put you first. This is not your average sell you something business. They're duty bound to act in your best interest, and they will help you to organize your finances. And I certainly have come to AES to have that done for me. So yeah, that's a great question. Inspiring and on Alex. Okay, this was the man that got me into triathlon way back. Difference between a good manager and a good leader. Well, in the army, we had management, we had leadership, and we had command. So we split it 3 ways. But I now rather think of management and leadership on a spectrum. You have a pure manager at this end and you have a pure leader at that end. And actually, you don't want to be either one or the other. You want to be somewhere on the spectrum between the two. So the difference is in nuance, in intensity of management or leadership. But I like a couple of glib answers here that just illustrate the difference between a good manager and a good leader, Porthos. And that is that a good leader does the right thing, and a good manager does things right. So a good leader is constantly looking for the difference, and a good manager is constantly looking for the similarities. That's the first piece. And then, of course, you could go further than that and say that a good manager spends his time watching what's going on and listening to what people are saying, whereas a good leader hears when there's no sound and sees when there's no light. Anyway, it all sounds a bit glib, but to answer a question, the difference between a good manager and a good leader in less than 17 hours and 53 seconds is almost impossible. So I'm going to stick with those three glib answers that, for me, are the difference between a manager and a leader. Shane, what are my views on coffee? Well, there are three legal drugs in the Western world these days, and they are caffeine, nicotine, and alcohol. Caffeine is the only one that I now use, and I use it because there are very few known side effects to caffeine, other than it will damage the quality of your sleep. And obviously, sleep is the first thing on the physical side. So my views on coffee are that you should use it as a tool because it's a performance-enhancing drug, and the World Anti-Doping Association, having dealt with Lance, etc., previously, would like to ban one thing if they could, and that is caffeine, because it makes such a big difference in performance. It makes a performance cognitively, so you're much sharper after coffee, and it makes a performance difference physically, so athletes perform better under caffeine. And the negatives are at the moment only around black teeth and sleep. So it will, depending on how you get your caffeine, coffee for certain, will be a negative if you drink it after, say, midday. And the reason behind that is the half-life of caffeine is about 6 hours, which means if you take 100 grams of caffeine with your coffee at midday, 50 grams of that caffeine is still swanning around your brain at 6 p.m. And at midnight, 25 grams of that caffeine are still swanning around your brain. And when you've got caffeine in your brain cannot be properly cleaned, as in that sewerage system that I talked about, the cleaning system, and nor can you sleep properly because you will be more in REM sleep than you will be in deep sleep under a caffeine load. So my views on coffee: use it, but preferably only in the mornings. And remember that decaffeinated does not mean no caffeine. It just means some of the caffeine has been taken out. And even in fully decaffeinated coffee, you could still have 30% of the caffeine still in that coffee. So it's not a done deal drinking decaffeinated coffee and expecting yourself not to have any caffeine. Obviously, my views on the other two legal drugs are that they may be legal, but their downsides outweigh their upsides by such a percentage that I would never touch them anymore, alcohol included. So Shane, great question. Thank you very much. Anushi, when leading a team, how can you spread your energy to your team? And if your energy is negative, avoid spreading it to the team. Great question. Okay, I have a rule. I will not coach unless I'm 80% on my game. And it's a subjective judgment. But I'll call the person who is paying me to coach them because I am not going to be able to do my job unless I'm 80% good. So if you are in your team and you're negative, well, these days it's relatively easy, specifically if you're allowed to work from home. But anyway, to separate yourself. And I remember a lovely habit that some regiments in the British Army had, which is when you come down to breakfast and you don't feel like talking, probably because you had too much alcohol the night before or you didn't have enough sleep, then you put your hat on. And that would mean I'm not communicating. Leave me alone. Brilliant. Maybe we should bring that into work. Anushi, you wear a hat at work, nobody's going to talk to you. Just an idea, and I'm being a bit flippant, but at the same time, quite serious, that if you communicate when you're in a downer, you are going to spread that downness to those around you. And we are always the environment of those in the room. We become their environment. We don't feel that way, but if you're down, they'll pick it up. So if you're down and you want to avoid spreading negative energy, take yourself off to work in a breakout room, or at least go and find yourself some energy from somewhere so that you can get back to work and be the best version of yourself. Now, how can you spread your energy to your team? Well, that's a lot easier, because they will pick up immediately, especially if they, and some of your team will be very, very switched on to mood and emotion. And if you come in full of the joys of spring with optimism in your heart, and optimism is consistent, considered, decisive, positive, proactive action. If you come in taking action that is positive, that is optimism, and that will spread very quickly. And what you'll find in amongst your employees is that you will get, if you can be optimistic with them and taking action towards positive outcomes, you'll find that they pick up on that, and they too will give you that extra discretional engagement, that extra 5 or 10% that they don't have to give. But we all know that when we can encourage through good leadership that extra 5 or 10%, then we get, and this is Gallup data, I think I read, Gallup data gave us, and Gallup data goes back to the Great Depression in the States. They've had 22 million people do their questionnaire. That Gallup data says that if you can get your employees to give that extra discretional 5 or 10% through your positivity and your optimism, then you'll get a 250% response on your bottom line on average. And that makes business sense. So negative managers, negative leaders are going to cost your bottom line. Positive, optimistic, good, well-trained, trusted leaders are going to increase your bottom line just through their attitude to work. I hope that's not too airy-fairy, but it is backed up by big data. Billy, I find abstinence much easier than balance, he says. Now, if anybody knows Billy, Billy Harkin is a legend of Dubai, a businessman who was super brilliant. That's a very modern way of saying it from retired army officers. Anyway, Billy basically is a brilliant friend and another of these inspirational people in my life. Lives? That's worrying. 2 of me. So he's asking about abstinence. Have you ever had challenges in this area, all in or all out? Always. And I don't believe in perfect moderation. We have this pleasure reward sensor in our brain that pumps out a lovely drug called dopamine. And some people call dopamine the pleasure hormone. I call it the more hormone. Because every time you get dopamine, you want more of whatever gave it to you, whether that is gambling, shopping, alcohol, cigarettes, I don't know, everything that gives you pleasure gives you a dopamine hit, and that means you want more. So in my case, a cigarette just led to another cigarette. A piece of cake will lead to another piece of cake. And actually, you can tell it's pleasure when you can have too much of a good thing. Alcohol is an obvious one. If you drink a little bit and then say, yep, more dopamine, more pleasure, more, then you will know because you'll have too much. Chocolate cake, first piece of chocolate cake is delicious. Second piece of chocolate cake, it's okay. The third piece is, yeah, I could do without, but I'm going to have the fourth piece anyway, and now I feel sick. And still there's a bit left, well, I better clean it up. That is pleasure. Now, dopamine down-regulates the key hormone, which I believe is serotonin, which is your mood and happiness. And unfortunately, the more pleasure you get, the less happy you will be on that basis. So actually eschewing the short-term pleasurable things will probably increase your happiness. And that may be some the reason why the really, really, really silly rich who have access to all pleasure anytime they like because they can pay for it tend to be the least happy people. Because dopamine downregulates serotonin and, unfortunately, oxytocin, which is the love hormone, and therefore it can be, too much pleasure can also be bad for your relationships. So I go for abstinence rather than perfect perfect moderation, because I don't believe in perfect moderation. So I am all in or all out. And on alcohol, I'm all out. On cigarettes, I'm all out. On caffeine, I'm all in until midday. Okay, Ahmed, I'll take 2 more questions. Ahmed, you need to start cycling. Any bit of advice on how to start? Yep, buy a bike. And when you've got your bike, get yourself out with friends. Anything you do with friends is something you will enjoy much more than you doing alone. So get out and do it with friends. Okay, you've got great friends down at that boot camp. Everybody cares for you and about you. And there is no doubt that without you, boot camp would be a lesser place. Let's make the same thing happen with a bicycle. Anonymous attendee, hey David, do you think athletes and humans generally shall live after a mantra? Interesting. If you've got a purpose, you should live on your purpose. If that's your mantra, that's a great way to do it. I've got a great colleague called Mick Todd, who is at his best because the world needs him at his best, and his job is to help other people. And that's his mantra. The world needs me at my best. So he performs at a very high level because that way he can maximize his effect on other people. And it is an overwhelmingly positive effect. Okay, Chris Seymour had to leave. No question. He's gone to the beach. He will be on the beach. Panic is inevitable, from Guido de Wilder. Guido, the answer is panic is not inevitable, as Michelle Norris demonstrated. Panic is not inevitable. If you are healthy in every department, your energy will overcome the panic. You will stay in touch with your thinking human brain and not recede into the background. And we all hit stress. Now, I've got 15 seconds left, so I'm going to have to call that the last question. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming to this. I'm sitting in AES offices. Thank you so much, AES. AES is a fiduciary. Their job, and what makes them different to any other financial or wealth management business, is that they must, just like a doctor or a priest, put your interests in front of theirs, which is why I work for them, because I intend to put your interests in front of mine wherever possible, because that's where I get my energy. And thank you all very much.